It was an early morning at the Canterlot Castle. Celestia was sitting by the balcony at her room, having some breakfast, while watching the sunrise as she was rising the sun on the sky. She enjoyed doing that every single morning. But then suddenly the peace was interrupted by a guard, who approached and explained that she had got a letter, and Celestia wasn't even expecting any letters from anyone. But she thanked him and took the letter, and when she read it, it was in fact from her old friend Honeyflower. Honeyflower and Celestia had been old friends back when she and Luna took over the power of the kingdom over 1,000 years ago. Honeyflower was back then a unicorn, but after she had proved so much of value about passion, of friendship and compassion to others, she decided to make Honeyflower as an alicorn. But this was in fact a secret not many ponies knew about. The only one the other ponies who knew about it was in fact Luna. And she had made a promise not to reveal this secret to any pony. Even not even the other alicorns that was came here centuries later. Honeyflower and Celestia was very close, but at some point after that Luna and Celestia became the princess of the kingdom. Honeyflower was in fact still loved to be around in touch with Celestia, but after a while she wanted to explore the kingdom by herself, and even though they remained in touch by letters from time to time, but even though when Celestia had asked herself, how does it any pony had heard about another alicorn after by that point, when she wrote that to Honeyflower at some point in the past. She explained she always kept her wings hidden. She never revealed her to be an alicorn to any pony. But now, centuries later, they have now finally reached out once again, and Honeyflower wrote to Celestia, telling her that she in fact is coming over for a visit for a couple of days before going back to her own home. Celestia and Honeyflower hadn't been seeing each other for at least a couple of 100 years, and she was so excited to see her old friend. When she told Luna about this, she was even first she didn't even remember Honeyflower, but when Celestia reminded her who she was and what is particularly special about her, then she immediately remembers. She was even happy to see her old friend again. Even though Luna and Celestia talked about Honeyflower from that day, they wonder what had she been up to for the past few 100 years, since they hadn't even heard from any word from her. And for just suddenly, one day, she just stopped sending letters to Celestia, and she may believe maybe that she was just too busy with traveling around, and maybe she was so far away and she forgot to write the letters. And one day, suddenly, then just sending a letter, just randomly. But still, Celestia was excited to meet her old friend again. In the letter, Honeyflower said she would be in town in town for next couple of days, so Celestia and Luna was given enough time to get ready for their meeting of Honeyflower once again. And that day came when Luna and Celestia were in the phone room just talking about some of their duties for that day when a guard walks up to Celestia and Luna saying they have a guest. Both Luna and Celestia looked at each other first and wondered who can it be. But then Celestia immediately remembers Honeyflower, and then she asked if it was a female unicorn. And the guard said yes, by the name Honeyflower. You can send them in. Send her in, said Celestia. When Celestia saw Honeyflower walks up to her, they first bowed and gave each other a hug, and even Luna was really happy to see her old friend again. They were actually surprised that she was even back in Kentland. So they decided to take a break from their duties and to spend some time with their old friend. They actually went to Celestia's own room where they had some tea, and then Luna asked Honeyflower what she had been up to for the past few hundred years, since they hadn't even heard much about her for the past couple hundred years. Honeyflower explained that she has been busy by traveling around. She had been working as a doctor for a couple of centuries and from time to time in different villages. But now she wanted to reach out to her old friends again, that she felt a bit lonely, that she had missed her old friends, that she had been still remembers the old memories of their childhood when Luna and Celestia just had risen, rise as the new leaders of the kingdom. But Honeyflower explains that she had been in touch, or at least been kept herself updated about Celestia and Luna's lives over the centuries. Even despite she hadn't even reached out, maybe because she thought maybe they were too busy to even had any contact with her. So that was another reason why Honeyflower hasn't even been in touch with them for so long. And though she still regret that she didn't reach out, because one day she heard about that Luna had been banished to the moon for 1,000 years before doing some she believed maybe it was some mistake. Then maybe thought maybe that maybe she shouldn't have reached out to Celestia back then, but she wanted to do so to be there to comfort her old friend. But maybe she believed even doing so would even cause more pain in Celestia's heart, realizing talking about her own sister being banished. So that is also one of the reasons why Honeyflower decided to avoid Celestia for at least maybe for 100 or maybe 200 years, just to be for safe side. And Celestia understood because she didn't want to be like a burden to her old friend. But since they had been centuries since then, she had moved on and she had forgiven her if she didn't want to talk to her friend then. But anyways, Luna and Celestia was just excited that Honeyflower had returned. But Luna asked how long would she stay. Honeyflower said maybe for about a week before she started going on her journey again. Then Luna asked how many times has she traveled around in the kingdom. Well, Celeste, she was told that she hasn't just traveling around in Equestria, which she has also been traveling around in Griffithstone or in the Griffin Kingdom, in Dragonlance, even back as far as Central Arabia. She has been living most of the time, both for a couple hundred years, in Central Arabia as a farmer or a doctor or at least something like that. She actually enjoyed her time staying there. But then Celestia had asked if she wanted to come home to live here in Candelot with them. Maybe it was time to reveal her secret to be an alicorn to the public. But even though when she mentioned this, Honeyflower still didn't even thought maybe that was a good idea. Even even Luna stated that there has been at least over 1,000 years. Ponies now should be an exception to you, even would even understand. But Honeyflower said, what the other princesses? Would they be shocked or even realize they would quite probably ask you a lot of questions why you haven't even told, especially them, about this big secret. I can understand you keeping this for a secret from the public, but the other princesses should know about this. At least. Celestia realized that Honeyflower had a point. So they decided to maybe invite Cadence and Twilight over to the castle for maybe within another 2 days so that they can be introduced to Honeyflower. Honeyflower thought maybe this was a good idea, even though Luna herself thought they might be shocked, but it is the only way for them to be know about this. Because who knew if they were encounter Twilight or Cadence at some point later on and maybe find out about her anyways. Celestia realized that Luna had a point. So, but in the same day, Celestia invited over Cadence and Twilight to the castle for the next day so that they can come over for some visit. There was something they wanted to talk about. And by the next day, both Twilight and Cadence were walking into the castle Both were talking about some this strange new something that they wanted to talk about. So when they were still introducing in the throne room to an old friend by the name Honeyflower, then she explained that they go back way back, far back in their history. But then Honeyflower removed the cloak she was wearing and revealed to be an alicorn. Both Cadence and Twilight was equally shocked. They were just staring at Honeyflower. They didn't expect to see this. But they then asked, why? And when did she become an alicorn? And for what reason? And why did you keep this as a secret from us? Said Twilight to Cadence. The only thing that Luna said, she did a lot of things like Twilight to be proving to be an alicorn. But the main reason why we didn't tell, because back then, only ponies knew there was only two alicorns, and they were probably not even understand why suddenly was a third alicorn at a time. But why haven't been heard about her, and even now? I mean, where has she been over the years? Honeyflower explained that she had been traveling around in a lot of kingdoms and even spending a lot of time in Cell Arabia for at least a couple of hundred years. So that explains at least that part, said Cadence. But even though despite the fact that now Cadence and Twilight now was aware about this, but even a couple of days later, Celestia had even revealed this information to the rest of the public that there were in fact now another alicorn that was even earlier before Cadence and Twilight. The reason why they explained the same thing to the public about why Honeyflower hasn't been revealed. But during her staying in Camelot, she spent a lot of time with Celestia, and they haven't tried to reach out to each other so they could spend more time. After all, they hadn't even seen each other for so long time. They would just want to reconnect it again, and but during one time when they were sitting in the castle garden just having some tea, when Celestia asked if during this time if Honeyflower had been seen or been married with some pony. But Honeyflower said that she hadn't even been married but she had been dating a few ponies back in the history back in her time, but not for the past 50 years or so. She had said she didn't want to be dating any pony like the moment because there were only one pony in her mind she loved the most of all. And there is some pony that hasn't even been told about her secret, or even her feelings, at least. When Celestia asked who this particular pony was, at first it was silent, but when Honeyflower explained it was Celestia that she had a crush on. Celestia almost choked on the tea that she had, but was drinking at the same time. She asked if there was some part of a joke, or at least she was not expecting that. But Honeyflower blushed and said it was the truth. She had been in love with Celestia for at least 500 years. Or something like that. And she hasn't been. She was too afraid of telling Celestia about this, and in particular when she was still in her early years while ruling out Equestria. She didn't want to be involving herself into Celestia's life or something like that, and she had no idea how Celestia even reacted to it, even back then. But Celestia then said she would have accepted, and she would have been with, at least, with Honeyflower. Honeyflower was not expecting that as an answer, but at least now they were aware about each other's feelings. And then Honeyflower asked if she maybe wanted to go out with her then. And Celestia was silent for only a few seconds when she said that she would like that. So they decided to go to this restaurant that was nearby in town, and they decided to even go the same afternoon. Even during that day, the rest of the day, They were so both of them was actually excited and a bit nervous to how to go on their first official date. And this would actually been Celestia's very first date ever. She has never dated any pony before, so she had basically no one all know how to know. She didn't know exactly how to date, so she decided to at least ask some of her friends for an advice. The only one that she asked was, in fact, Twilight. Since Twilight was dating Flash Century, one of the royal guards from Crystal Empire, and she gave her some advice what to do, what to talk about, and just like that. Some were basic dating 101, and Celestia thanked her for the advice. On that date to Westwood, both Celestia and Honeyflower at first they didn't know what to talk about at first because they hadn't even thought about dating at first, but Celestia remembers some of the advice of from Twilight. Then she asked some of her travels, like if there was any particular place that she liked the most staying at for a longer time, except for Celestia. Honeyflower said, well, the only place that she liked the most was in fact Celestia. She had a lot of fun there. She had a lot of great friends, and she loved the place. And then, after that moment, the day between Celestia and Honeyflower just went smoothly. They laughed about some of their jokes and just having a great time. And after that first date, they realized they actually were meant to be with each other. But even after this while, though, that Celestia was realized that Honeyflower was going back home to Arabia soon, and who knows when they will be able to see each other soon next time. So Celestia had then offered to let Honeyflower stay in the castle as long as she wanted, if she didn't even want to move there. Even though Honeyflower still wanted to go back home to Arabia. But after a while of thinking about this, and she realized if she was still living there, they would be so far away and they wouldn't be able to see each other so often they wanted. So Honeyflower then decided to move from Central Arabia to live in Cantlot. In fact, she declined the offer to live in a castle. She decided to live in a small place of her own in town. Now, since the public knows that she was an alicorn, so there wasn't any problem. Even though when she had moved to Cantlot maybe a couple of weeks after that, there was a lot of things that happened between Celestia and Honeyflower. The relationship remained strong. They went on many dates. Honeyflower often helped Luna with some of the royal duties if Celestia couldn't. The bond between Luna and Honeyflower had remained strong. They had such much great time as friends. But one day things would change because one late evening when Honeyflower had decided to take a late evening stroll or walk because she didn't have much to do or she couldn't sleep. So she decided to take a walk around town just to get some fresh air to maybe help her to get some sleep. But as she was almost halfway back from home, she was immediately struck down from behind. Some pony struck her with some object, maybe a piece of wood or something, and she fell to the ground unconscious. Some ponies immediately grabbed her and somehow managed to hide behind a building and managed to put in at least a piece of wrap around her mouth so she couldn't speak and tied her legs and carried her out of town to a different location. And the next day, we're supposed when Honeyflower and Celestia was supposed to meeting for lunch. But when Honeyflower didn't even appear to the castle at lunchtime, she was a bit worried that if maybe she had forgotten about it. So she decided to send a guard to Honeyflower's home, her apartment, to see if she was home. But when the guard came back, he informed Celestia that Honeyflower wasn't even home. So maybe then she had forgotten the time that she was supposed to be in having lunch today. So she told one of the guards if, to ask around in town if they'd seen Honeyflower, or at least she had forgotten. So the guard went back outside the town, looking around, asking some of the ponies if they had seen her. But after nearly 4 hours later, the guard came back and informed Celestia that no pony has seen Honeyflower since yesterday, or at least her neighbors hadn't even heard a word from her. They hadn't even seen or heard leaving or coming back home from her apartment for a whole day. Now, Celestia was getting a bit worried. She hadn't even been accepted for this to happen because this was something Honeyflower would never do. If she was about to leave town, she had at least been informing Celestia about that and even telling exactly how long she would be gone and where she was going. She even then told one of the guards to go back to her apartment to see if there was any papers showing telling if she was leaving or where she was planned to go, or if there was any letters that she received telling her if she was going to a particular place. But the guard went back to her apartment with another guard. They searched through it clearly, but found nothing. They didn't find any letters showing if she was planning to go somewhere. There were no notes saying if she had planned for a trip or something like that. But now, when they came back to castle and told Celestia about this, she was getting worried. So now she decided to send out some of the guards to search for her in various areas, because she may have been get hurt or something. She may have ended up leaving castle, or maybe she left town and somehow end up hurt, or she is unconscious or somewhere. So the guards were sent out and searched an area up to maybe 2 miles from the city, but so far no signs of her. There were no other ponies who were outside town or like in Ponyville had even seen or heard from her. When she told Twilight about this, she was equally worried about this. Even Cadence had been informed and had been asked if Honeyflower may have been in the Crystal Empire, but there were no ponies had seen or heard enough if she was in the Crystal Empire. That rest of the day, Celestia and Luna was getting worried, but Celestia was the most worried. She hadn't even heard or seen her girlfriend for over a day. Even though despite sometimes they didn't see each other for a couple of days or something like that, but they at least have been talking about being informed if they were going away somewhere or they were too busy. But that same evening, a guard came back into the front room with a letter, or at least some appearing to be a note. He hasn't even read the note itself. When Celestia read it, she fainted. Luna grabbed the letter and asked, "What was wrong?" When she read the note, it said, "If you want to see Honeyflower again alive, or at least anything of her, we demand 4 million bits in her return to safety. And don't try to find her. You won't. We are keeping her safe. Signed, Kidnappers." Every pony in the room was silent. Celestia was still unconscious. Luna was shocked. She had no idea what to do. She told one of the guards to immediately send a message to Cadence and Twilight, and especially Twilight, to come to the castle as fast as she can along with her friends. They was informed by Luna when they came to the castle later that night. "Are you serious? They want 4 million bits for her returning. That's an insane price, said Rainbow. Yeah, but what can we do? Said Applejack. And since we don't know exactly where they are and how she was taken and without any police saw them, we don't have any clues where Virginia to go, said Applejack again. What about Celestia? Said Rarity. She's still unconscious. She hasn't even gained it, said Luna. I'm worried. This is something I ever could expect. But what shall we do? Said Twilight. I know that my sister wants her returned safely. So am willing to pay the ransom for return of Honeyflower safely. But how do we know for sure if they ever want to go be obeying or if they want not harm her if they get it paid? Said Rainbow. I mean, have you even considered, even despite they would get the money or the bets, the ransom for us, how could we not be sure if they won't even harm her or had even harmed her anyways before that? She has a point, said Applejack. We can't even be so certain if they never had even considered to harm her, if they even had this any sort of morale or some sort of at least decent enough to be even harm her if they get the money. It was silent in a moment. Had the guard sense searched everywhere? Luna just nodded and said, We had searched almost everywhere in the kingdom. We had asked other towns to search any areas that they lived in, other small towns, farms, anywhere that can be in any secluded areas that may contain ponies that we're able to find. Wait, said Luna, said Rarity. What about the dreams? The dreams? Yeah, right, said Fluttershy. You can walk in your dreams and contact them. Have you even tried to reach out to her in a dream? Yes, I have, but no luck. But then Applejack realized. Wait a minute. I thought about something. If she is an alicorn, so even if somehow she managed to regain consciousness, she may have easily been to free herself and defeat the kidnappers and have her return home by now. Every pony just looked and realized that Rainbow had a big point. Unless, unless what? Said Rainbow. Unless they had put some sort of anti-magic ring on the horn. Is that possible? Said Rarity. Unfortunately, yes, said Luna. Those things are quite common, but if that is true, it can even block even the strongest alicorn magic, even mine, said Luna. So, if you had even found her in her dreams, said Twilight, she may have been kept awake the whole time, and that's like a prevent a way to find her, said Francia. It seems the only explanation to that, said Luna. So what? So what should we do now? Pay them, said Luna. But there's one thing I don't even thought about. Even if you have the ransom, where will you have to take them? Because it doesn't even mention in the note where you're supposed to be leaving it so they can be take it. That was something Luna hadn't even thought about. So she took the note once again and read it over and over, but nothing. There were no hints saying exactly where to drop off the ransom and to find Honeyflower. She was right. There were no hints. Since they had no idea exactly where to drop off the money. So, now what? They all asked themselves. But then a guard ran in and saying that he had another note bodyguards, or from the kidnappers. But if they had been arriving by the note, why didn't they just capture one of those kidnappers? But it wasn't even kidnappers that were approaching the body letter or the note. It was in fact just a random child who was on the way home, or at least had been told to deliver this note to the castle and was paid 20 bits to do so. And with the child, they tried to explain how this figure looked like. But at least by then, what she could tell was unicorn, but was cloaked, couldn't see either the cutie mark or how their face looked like. And the voice was a male. So that explains at least a male unicorn had one of the kidnappers. Around the same time, in the kidnapper's hideout, Honeyflower was very terrified because the kidnappers had been giving her a lot of some drugs or some sort of substance to keep her awake. She was now terrified that they would harm her, or anyway. She can hear the guards, the kidnappers, talking about they have now received an answer. They will get the money. And they all laughed and looked at her. Well, when we get paid, you can leave. But not before then. If you don't have been paid enough in a time, well, we don't have the time to even want to spend keeping her here. We just leave her here and then just go, said the kidnappers. But the next day, they had managed to gather enough for 4 million bits and left them in some old abandoned barn just outside of town. But that was not the only thing. Luna, Twilight, and her friends was keeping along with at least along with a patrol of 10 guards hidden so they were to capture the kidnappers. And even though the first they all thought maybe nothing would go according to plan, but unfortunately they were right, because when the kidnappers arrived, they managed to capture every single one. And at an interrogation, they cracked and told where to find Honeyflower. And in fact, she wasn't even that far from the castle itself. She was actually located in an old abandoned place, in a basement, a secret basement for that. Somehow there was a soundproof spell to keeping her so she no pony would even hear that if some pony was below the building. When Celestia saw that Honeyflower was back home safe, she couldn't be more happier to see her. But especially now, Luna, the others, but just had to see that Celestia had regained consciousness when he came back with Honeyflower. The doctor who examined Honeyflower said she was in good health, but just after when Celestia hugged Honeyflower, she fell to the ground, released to the floor, unconscious herself. But that was in fact she had been kept awake for 22 days straight without any sleep and any food at that point. She was so exhausted. Even the doctor said that she would be fine. As long as she gets some other rest and something to eat, she will be fine. And after a couple of days, he was right. Honeyflower was back to health, and even though she was a bit scared, so then at that point she moved in the castle to be more safe. Because she knows no pony would even dare to even break into the castle when there are tons of guards around. So she was right. Even for Celestia, she was just happy to have her true love back home. She was really happy that. Even after all these events, Celestia was happy that her true love was back home. And just after barely 2 years of being dating, Honeyflower actually proposed to Celestia, which she said yes immediately. Honeyflower had asked Luna to be the bridesmaid, and Twilight had been asked to perform the ceremony, while Celestia had asked Fluttershy to be her bridesmaid. And it was a perfect moment. Even after the ceremony was over, all the friends could see how happy both Celestia and Honey Flower were together, and they were clearly meant to be with each other. They even went to Las Pegasus for a whole week for the honeymoon. There, they had a great time, watching some of the shows, enjoying the rides, and just having such great time. But there were a lot of things between that happened, because during the staying in Jerusalem, in Las Pegasus, Celestia told herself she would never let anything to harm Honeyflower ever again. And just then, but after they had been married for about 4 years, Celestia and Honeyflower had talked about starting a family of their own. So they asked Twilight to help. Since Twilight had learned a spell allowing two mares to be having a child of their own, since she had been using the same spell to help a number of couples back home in other points before. So Celestia decided to be pregnant, and when they were told she was expecting twins, she was in fact expecting twin daughters, and that was a big news to the whole kingdom. Both for Celestia and Luna, it was really happy about. But the most, when Honeyflower was told about this, she fainted because of this big shock. But she was excited to be a mother to twins, though. And then the day came when the daughter was born. Their first daughter was named Askella. Askella was very calm, filly when she was young. She loved to read and do books with her parents. Even though when she was 10, she became Twilight's personal student, and she loved to be her aunt Twilight's student. She has a natural talent in magic along with her sister and her parents, though. But even after she discovered her cutie mark around age 12, she still didn't know what to do later on in her life. But after one trip to Saudi Arabia when she was about 11, she discovered the music. She was one day when she was walking on the street by herself. She noticed another pony was playing guitar for the public for entertainment. She listened, and somehow she was some enchanted by the music's tones, the style of the music. After she came back, she asked her parents if she can maybe hire maybe a music teacher to play guitar. She wanted to play that, and Celestia hired a music teacher for her. And after 2 years of practice, she was completely trained. She, from that day on, played often for her family and friends in a different occasions like in different holidays or even other. Maybe if they had a bad day, it was raining outside, and she loved it. After the very first time she saw them playing the guitar in Saudi Arabia when she was 11, the spark in interest. She wanted to be a musician. So ever since she had played guitar for 2 years of practice, she started to appearing in town at different locations, playing for her fellow ponies, but sometimes she even went to Ponyville to play guitar. And the public loved her playing of her guitar. They loved it. And from that moment, she realized that is what she meant to have been doing all along. She wanted to be a musician, and she had fulfilled her dream. And at some point, she even fell in love with a stallion from Manhattan. He was also a musician, and he played both guitar and piano. And there was a good combination for both of them to realize there much potential in their love. They even got married after they had been married dating for about 3 years and have two daughters of their own. And their daughters was also born as allegories. Their second daughter was named Celeste. Celeste was like her own twin sister. She loved reading during the books with her parents, and she was naturally talented in magic. But there was one thing about her when she was very young. She loved to pull pranks against her parents along with Escella. But that didn't stop them that. She even pulled pranks against the guards themselves and even her own sister. She loved to pull pranks against her family and some of the guards, even friends. But after a while, though, she actually grew past that. Even when she was about 12, along with her twin sister, she also got her cutie mark. But she was also curious and wondering what would she do rest on from now on. She, even despite that she had discovered her special talent, but was one thing she did like to do most of all when she was a bit older. That was in fact writing her own stories. When she was about 18, she published a short story in a newspaper, and it was well liked by the public. And from that sparked an interest she wanted to be an author. So she decided to spend some time to write her own book. And after a while, though, she managed to write a whole book about a childhood story. She published it, and it was well loved by the public as well. That has sparked her interest even more to be an author. So she decided to travel around in Equestria to read more, to study more about poems, and to get inspired to get to writing more about stories. And after that, she went back home, write some more stories, and it was a great hit. She even fell in love at some point with a stallion from Ponyville. He was in fact a doctor. They even got married after they had been dating for about 4 years. They even got two daughters. Both of them was actually alicorns. And even when their daughter was about 5, they even had a son, who also turned out to be an alicorn. And even after that, she loved her family so much. The love between Celestia and Honeyflower was so strong. Celestia couldn't be more happier to be with the one she loved the most of all. Even after that, when Honeyflower told her about her true feelings for Celestia, if Honey, if Honeyflower had even told her, she may not have never have found a true love and have such amazing family with her. The same thing is for Honeyflower. If she didn't have the courage to tell Celestia about her feelings, she would may have missed out such so much joy with the one she loved the most of all. Even after all this time, her love for Celestia had only grown stronger and stronger for each single day. Even after, especially after the time when she was captured by kidnappers. And her love for Celestia was so strong, even especially when she realized when she found out her friends had found saved her and the kidnappers was trapped. Even after all this time, after all this what they had been going through, had only made their love for each other so strong it can never be broken. And this is how Celestia and Honeyflower found a true love got a big family together. The end.